It's really good to be back yet after another month since my last post. I hope that you're well and I hope that your month has been a good one. And whatever difficulties or challenges you had, I hope you managed to overcome them and in that process be kind to yourself. I am good. I had a really busy month, but it has been a good one. Good busy, as I like saying. I had family over visiting from Romania, which has been really good. It's been really nice to be off work and get to spend some time with family. I will be honest, sometimes spending time with your loved ones and loving your loved ones, your family, isn't the easiest task in the world, especially when there's a lot of history. But it has been really, really good to have my mom and my granny over and to get to show them a bit of Scotland and this beautiful city, Edinburgh. They really liked it. And of course, they're keen to return and see more. I hope wherever you are, the sun is shining, or that you are just managing to be at peace with whatever the weather is. Here today is raining. It's not gloomy though, it's quite nice and bright. And I don't know for you, but for me, rain gives me most of the times a sense of peace and a sense of calm and nostalgia. It makes me feel quite nostalgic. And what better way to experience the rain than being in the house, nice and warm and dry, and enjoying a cup of tea, or why not being out dancing in the rain if it's a warm rain. Yeah, so that being said, for today's video, I want to discuss and explore with you the last stage of the counseling process, stage or phase, which is called endings. In my previous video, I've discussed and explored the middle stage of the counseling process. Similar to the structure of my previous video, in today's video we will be exploring a bit what endings is, what it entails, best practice in terms of what the counselor needs to be doing to bring the client to hopefully have a good experience of this stage of the counseling process. We'll be looking a bit at the skills and the knowledge that the counselor must have in order to know how to bring and guide the client at this stage and through this stage, and supporting the client with closure and letting go, and the importance of not creating dependency between him and the client. So yeah, best practice. We'll be looking a bit at ways of being, ways of doing, and what's good example of endings and not a good example of endings. We'll also explore a bit about the internal experience of the client and the counselor, what this stage might feel like for both of them, as well as we'll be touching a bit on how the relationship might look like and feel like at this last stage. And lastly, I'll be sharing a bit about my experience of ending a counseling relationship and how that felt for me. And I'll give you a bit of an update about how my COSCA counseling certificate skills is going. At the end of the video, I will give you an update on that. So yeah, without further ado, let's dive right in. What is the endings in the counseling process? Some people call it endings, some people call it termination, and in theory and in practice, this should only occur when the goals that are mutually agreed by the client and the counselor at the beginning of their counseling relationship and process have been achieved. It goes without saying that this is the last stage of the counseling process. So yeah, it should only end when the goals that have been established have been achieved, or depending on what type of counseling is, if there weren't any specific goals that were agreed upon, very particular and very specific and very well defined, the counseling relationship should end only when the problem that the client has been resolved, or at least it has become more manageable for the client. The most important feature of the this phase of the counseling process is to be planned. Before I continue, I just want to mention I don't feel 100% today, so bear with me. Yeah, so as I was saying, the most important feature of this stage is to be planned. That the counselor's responsibility is to plan this this stage, and it's really important to be clear about one aspect. Endings doesn't consist of one last session. Being planned, it requires that the counselor begins to explore the topic of ending the counseling relationship and the process with the client at least a few sessions before the end of the block, if having a well-defined number of sessions is the case, or the counselor beginning to understand that the client has arrived in a different place, has arrived in a better place, and is managing. And it's the counselor's responsibility to initiate this conversation about ending the relationship, because the entire purpose of the counseling relationship is to help the client resolve their difficulty and their challenges and their problems, and empower the client to be able to manage further on their own. The topic of dependency is a problem. As a counselor, a really good counselor would not want to make their client dependent on them as a counselor, on their skills, on their wisdom, on their relationship, or on the counseling process. To give you a bit of a bad example of what an bad ending can look like, that can happen if the counselor or the client might end the relationship or the process abruptly, without giving any notice, without giving any reason. If it's the case that the counselor, the client ends the relationship, that might be for various reasons. Either they don't feel ready to cope with the idea of ending their relationship, so they prefer to just break off abruptly, or they feel like counseling is not for them. They don't feel ready to continue with the middle stages and to bring that exploration they're doing to a closure, or they just want to see a different counselor, so they break off from this counseling relationship, their current counseling relationship, and go to see some other counselor. Also, the counselor can be the one who can initiate a bad ending by stopping the counseling relationship in the process without any notice, which would leave the client very confused and very hurt and with a sense of betrayal. So both are destructive for the counselor and for the client. A situation to be aware of is that endings can happen abruptly when the client becomes very dependent on the counselor, and it is not professionally to sustain such a relationship. You want to teach, support, and guide your client to be able to cope on his own and be able to cope with the ending of this relationship. Another example of a bad ending can be just constant dragging. Unfortunately, there are a lot of counselors out there and therapists who would be dragging on, not ending the counseling or the process, the counseling relationship or the process, because they continue to see their clients for money, and they will be pushing the client to explore further things that maybe are not necessarily issues for the client, and they will maybe making the client to have a sense that there are a lot of other things that could be explored, so they can continue receive money from them, which is really, really bad practice, and it should never happen. And if you feel like you're in a relationship, in a counseling relationship like that, you should terminate that relationship or bring that on the table as a topic. Because a counselor doing so undermines the client's confidence and reverse any benefits of the counseling. And that really breaches the professional boundaries that a counselor is responsible to hold at every time. Also, if a counselor and a client engage in a romantic or platonic relationship, that also is an example of a bad ending of the counseling relationship, as well as breaches the professional boundaries of the counseling process and relationship. So yeah, that's a bit about bad practice. Good practice examples are the counselor prepares the client for this stage, for this phase. And you maybe ask, well, when would the counselor know that ending is appropriate? As I've mentioned, when the client appears that they're doing so much better, and that they are the incipient stages when they're very self-reliant, or at least start having more confidence in themselves, or if self-confidence and self-esteem is a difficulty in managing their challenges or problems, or when the issues that have been agreed to discuss on and to explore have been resolved, or when the goals have been achieved, or they're also the case when the client maybe doesn't have this again, it's not necessarily the best example, but there are cases when the client wouldn't have any more the financial resources to sustain that counseling relationship, and that is an example of a bad ending. And there are a few things that a counselor can do to help with that, either continuing to see the client for a reduced fee, or maybe supporting the client to access counseling somewhere else, so it's not a total ending for the client if they didn't reach a resolution for their difficulties. But unfortunately, they are the case when a counseling relationship and process will have to come to an end, either because the number of agreed sessions has come to an end, and if a counselor works for an organization that only allows a specific number of sessions, there are a lot of things that counselors can do. They can refer, signpost the client to a different organization, so the client can continue to benefit from this kind of support. But yeah, returning to best practice, so the counselor will definitely have to be preparing the client and prepare in advance for this ending phase. And endings isn't happening in a session. The session requires planning in advance, notice, discussing the idea of ending the relationship, and it should hopefully allow the client to explore their feelings and give feedback in the whole process. Clients may share at this phase and stage what they have learned about themselves and what changes have taken place. They will also be less reliant on the counselor and now be able to draw on from their own inner resources to problem solve and gain self-confidence. Be aware that clients may leave and never return. This can be because they're not ready to face change, or their priorities may have altered as a counselor. It's really important to be aware of that. So a client can end this relationship, again touching on a bad ending. Issues such as health or family or work can emerge, and it's not always the case that the client will end the counseling relationship because they want to, but because they don't have other choice. Best practice, to be prepared to discuss with the client what ending the relationship might entail. In terms of knowledge and skills that the counselor must have to support the client and guide the client through this stage is, first of all, self-awareness. They really need to be aware that ending a relationship with a client can affect them as well as the client, and being really aware of how this might affect them, because of course the counselor has invested themselves intellectually, emotionally in that relationship, and just having that awareness of how does the counselor deal with endings. And of course, from having that self-awareness, they can extend empathy to what the client might feel and they can have a better understanding of what the client might experience. So as we are touching on that, I'm going to have a wee look at my notes to discuss with you a bit about what the experience of the client might feel like. And then we'll be returning on knowledge and skills that a counselor must have. So a client might be avoiding an ending, might feel anxious, might have a sense of abandonment, might feel very unsatisfied. They might feel also maybe very confident and have a sense of reassurance and hopeful and inspired, and they feel more self-reliant, more empowered. They feel like they gain a sense of healing. So it's not all doom and gloom. It goes in the positive end and towards the difficult end as well. Maybe the client, if the counseling process has been fruitful and which we hope it would have been fruitful for the client might feel like a new person and like they are ready to leave their old self and old life behind. There might be less holding back from the client's side and in making changes. They may feel more self-accepting. They might start making big changes in their life, such as starting a new job, changing the field of work, ending or beginning a significant romantic relationship. And yeah, these are some of the feelings, internal experiences that the client might have, and hopefully will have good ones. In terms of the counselor's internal experience, there might be a sense of relief, a sense of job satisfaction, a sense of fulfillment that they have done what they enjoy and they train to do, which is helping people to develop and helping people to heal and empowering people. They might get a sense of their own personal development, because in each counseling relationship, the counselor learns a lot about themselves and about their own capacity and skills, and limitations as well. Also, the counselor might experience a sense of frustration if that specific counseling relationship didn't have a particular good ending, or it doesn't look like it will have a good ending for the client. Really important for the counselor, talking about skills, is to pay attention to the ending and helping facilitate the ending and not necessarily imposing the ending. So it's really important for the counselor, when they have a sense that the client has reached the stage where endings is appropriate, they need to initiate that conversation and facilitate this stage, but not to push it. Ideally, as I said, there are cases when the client and the counselor will have to terminate the relationship, be that lack of financial resources, or be that just reaching the maximum number of sessions that the counselor is allowed to offer given the organization they work for. But yeah, never from the counselor side to impose an ending or ignore the client who might signal that they're ready to end the relationship, although some goals haven't been achieved. Not necessarily to agree with the client if goals have been achieved, but to not ignore the client's request and to explore and facilitate the client to reach a decision that suits them best at that time of their life. And yeah, also the counselor is really important to express how endings feel for them, because, as I said, there are two parties involved, and in this relationship, it's not just about the client, it's also about the counselor, and the counselor expressing how the relationship has been for them will encourage the client to express their own feelings as well. In terms of how the relationship might feel like for both the client and the counselor, that might entail a sense of loss. That might require the counselor to re-establish possible future contact with the client. for the client to request further meetings, future meetings after this counseling relationship has ended. I think as a rule, there must be a gap of 3 or 6 months between ending a relationship, a counseling relationship with a specific counselor, and restarting that relationship. But it really differs from case to case and from relationship to relationship. The counselor can refer or signpost the client to a different organization or for a different form of support. A really important feature of this phase is reviewing the work that has been done, how the entire relationship and process and work has felt for both of them, the areas that, again, now touching on the skills and the knowledge that the counselor must have to facilitate this stage of the counseling process. The counselor really needs to know how to help the client review their progress and acknowledge the content that has been explored, as well as what is meant for the client and where that brought them in terms of development, as well as acknowledging the content that hasn't been explored, that has been only mentioned and hasn't been explored, and again what that meant for the client and how they are engaging with that content further, how the person has changed, how the counselor and the client have changed, and really and checking with the client their sense of satisfaction, whether the client has achieved what they hoped for, whether they gain from that relationship what they hope they will gain, or just weighing the gains that they maybe never envisaged, or they never hoped for, or they never knew they're possible to obtain. Acknowledging the material that the client didn't want to look at, didn't choose to look at, either because they weren't ready or they just didn't want to engage with it. Anticipate maybe and talk about the end and the loss of that relationship. Also touch upon unfinished business, because it will be the case in a lot of counseling relationships that there will be a lot of things that start to be explored, but then once the counselor helps the client to focus on specific aspects, there will be a lot of things that will be left necessarily unexplored, which it's a good thing, because in counseling, if you have a finite amount of time, you need to be realistic, and you need to be aware of the fact that you cannot explore absolutely everything under the sun that the client has brought on the table. That's why focusing is really important, so the counselor can help the client to resolve particular issues one by one. Discuss the counselor. It's really important for the counselor to know how to discuss future contact with the client. There will be the case where maybe as a client you will meet your counselor in a public area, or you will meet the counselor in the community, or you'd meet the counselor in a different role. Maybe you'll meet the counselor as a friend of a friend of a friend, and you didn't know that was the case, and it's really important for the counselor to know about this likelihood and to explain that to the client, and to decide together, to agree on how they would behave towards each other if such thing is to happen, and also thinking about the future contact, agreeing on whether the counselor and the client will contact each other in any form or in any way, and for what purpose. And just the counselor knowing how to say goodbye to their client, and also helping the client to learn how to say goodbye. In terms of skills and in terms of knowledge, I mentioned self-awareness, about knowing how they deal with endings, also helping the client to understand themselves on how they themselves, the client, deals with endings, helping them reflect on how they deal with endings in general, in their life, and how they deal with endings in relationships, in endings with a job, or in endings with a chapter of their life or a season of their life. So you're really helping the client to understand themselves and gain further self-awareness about how they deal with endings, because that will help the client then to deal with this ending, and hopefully in a good way and in a positive way, and not with unpleasant feelings or a sense of abandonment. Looking a bit at again at the skills that are necessary for a counselor to have. Yeah, all the skills that are entailed for the beginning stage and for the middle stage: the empathy, the acceptance, the genuineness, the trust and the openness, of course the attentive listening, the observing and sensing, the accurate responding, the reflection on feelings. It's really important to reflect again on clients' feelings at this stage, because that gives them that feedback, and also giving the client the opportunity to offer feedback on how all that relationship felt for them. Yeah, really important is for the counselor to be able to provide further information should the client want to access other forms of support, be that with themselves and a different type of relationship after a specific break, or with other organizations or professionals. I think it's really important as a counselor to help the client to identify the strengths that the client has, and help them to take a really good look at their internal resources and what are those things that they can rely upon within themselves. Dependency is a really difficult aspect, and there are a lot of counseling relationships out there that continue indefinitely because the client has become dependent on the counselor, and on that counseling relationship, and they have a sense that they cannot cope on their own. Even if things are okay, they just maybe want to continue that relationship for the sake of, what about if something happened? Would I be able to cope on my own? Better not terminate this relationship and just continue it. And sometimes the counseling relationship becomes a friendship, and the client will go and see their counselor on a monthly basis or on a weekly basis or every other few months, as a friend rather than as a counselor. It's totally fine for the client to ask to have maybe some review sessions at 3 months or once a month or at 6 months to check in and just to see how they're feeling, as long as that relationship remains a counseling relationship and does not transform in a friendship. Yeah, helping the client to review the work, helping the client review the process and the progress, and review their strengths as well as acknowledge their limitations. It's the best way for a counselor to facilitate the endings phase. Most importantly for the counselor is to empower the client, and be really realistic about things. And if the counselor chooses to terminate a counseling relationship, they really need to be really aware what is the reason why they are ending that counseling, be that because the client makes them feel inadequate or that they are not doing a good job, or be that because maybe the counseling relationship has been really draining for them. These aspects are really important for the counselor to be aware of and to discuss them in supervision. And if things aren't resolved in supervision and the counselor feels like they don't have that resources to continue the relationship, they need to try and discuss this in their personal therapy. A counselor is allowed to terminate a relationship if they feel like they are reaching no they're not going anywhere with their client, and then the client constantly refuses to terminate the relationship because maybe they're so attached to their counselor and they cannot terminate that relationship. But yeah, this is really important to be discussed in supervision and in personal therapy, and then dealt with in a really, really tentative and compassionate manner, for the counselor's sake as well as for the client's sake especially. If I'm thinking of other aspects I wanted to explore with you, I said to you a bit about what endings is the last stage of the counseling process, what it entails. Most important feature is to be prepared and plan ahead and discuss with the client. And ending a relationship, it's not happening in the last session. Let's say if you have a block of 18 sessions, you are not going to wait as a counselor until the 18th session to explain to your client that the process will end there and the relationship will end there. You need to start preparing with your client maybe at least 3 or 4 sessions in advance to give time to the client to get used to the idea and have time to review the work and the progress and the healing that has happened and the change that has happened for them, and to give them a sense of reassurance that things will be okay and that they will be able to manage, or give time to the client to get used to the idea of maybe needing to see someone else and beginning a new relationship with someone else, if that's the case. So really, really important never to be ended abruptly, always being aware as a counselor of the motives why you're ending a relationship, never imposing that endings phase on a client if the client doesn't feel ready. If you feel as a counselor that the client is dragging and is not ready to terminate their relationship, although you feel like they've reached the stage where they should be able to manage on their own, that is to be discussed in supervision and in personal therapy, and of course brought up with the client, because it's normal. If you're helping the client to figure out how they deal with endings, this is really important to discuss. This relationship will come to an end. How are you feeling about it? And it's normal for the client to feel tearful or emotional or sad or upset or angry or not. It's really important for it might be that your client will feel great and they'll feel very excited about ending that form of support and feel reassured they can cope on their own. So you as a counselor is really important to manage your feelings as well, no matter the reaction or the feedback you're getting from your client. Letting go, it's not easy for anyone. As a counselor, having that awareness of how you're dealing with endings and putting that in practice, and also helping your client to deal with endings and understanding how they deal with endings in general. Maybe ending this relationship will remind them of a very painful pattern where they always feel abandoned, or it might be a new experience for them because they never actually had a closure or a healthy and good ending with someone, and this might be their first experience of a good ending or a bad ending. So it's really important to be really aware of that, reviewing the contract, reviewing the work done, and just saying goodbye. Thinking of the last point of that I wanted to discuss with you in this video, my experience of ending counseling. Because I was going through a rough time, and I've seen my counselor for, I think, a number of 16 or 17 sessions. I'm going to be honest, actually the counselor I've seen has begun to talk about endings only not the last, but the previous session before the last session. So I feel like she didn't necessarily give me the best heads up, but also I was a very intense client and I had a lot going on, and she did give me the option. She did give me the option to continue counseling with someone else, or even with her in that service. But so she told me about us reaching the end of our counseling block a few weeks in advance to start with, but then I explained to her that I'm not ready to end the counseling relationship. So she has done well, and she has asked her manager for another short window of sessions, which involved another 3 or 4 sessions, I think. But yeah, at the end of this second block, I feel like she didn't necessarily do the best job at helping me to come to an ending of that relationship. But she has tried her best. As I said, I was quite an intense and a difficult client. And I decided to terminate that relationship on good terms with her. And I took a break, and then I decided to see her in a different relationship as a coach with a counseling approach, but as a coach, and that has been really, really helpful. I remember at the last session, I was crying, I was tearful because I was really attached to my counselor. She has been there for me through a very difficult period of time for me, and she was really honest, and she has highlighted to me that she reckoned that I was quite dependent on the support that she offered, and I acknowledged because that was the case. I was really fearful that I would manage on my own. And that gives me really good insight on what a client might feel like. So this experience has been really, really precious for me because it gives me a good understanding of what it might feel like for a client, that the fear of not coping on their own or not managing is there, can be there. My counselor, I said she didn't necessarily do a great job at giving me a lot of notice, but she's been really good at encouraging me strongly to try to look at the positive aspects, and that has helped massively because I did a lot of reflective work on how much I changed in that period, how much my circumstances have changed, how I was so much more aware of my internal resources, and how I had that strength. I just needed someone to remind me of it, and just offering me a lot of reassurance that things will work out well, and they did. And I remember her saying, trust me and trust the process. And at the beginning, I was like, no way. But yeah, I took a leap of faith, and I managed really well without her for a number of months. And only then, when I felt like I'm managing well, not perfectly, but well, and I'm coping really well, and my life has changed and my circumstances have changed. There has been a lot of change that has happened, and so her encouraging me to review that work and to focus on the positive aspects and to focus on the new level of self-acceptance that I gained for myself and for my life and for my past circumstances has been great, really, really good. And it taught me how important it is for a counselor to provide reassurance and to strongly encourage and facilitate for the client to look at the work that has been done, as well as acknowledging all those aspects that haven't been explored, and acknowledging that is not possible in a counseling relationship of a finite interval of time to be exploring everything. So that really gave me a really good insight into what it might feel like for a client to end a counseling relationship, both acknowledging the positive and the encouraging and the development and the good change, as well as the difficult side of it, and the sense of fear and of loss. And it highlighted for me how I dealt with endings. I didn't do endings. I disappeared from relationships, but I didn't necessarily had closure. So this was actually my first time when I had a proper closure with someone in this way, and has been really, really helpful for me to see how I dealt with that. and having her facilitating that has been really, really good for my personal development as well as professional development. And yeah, as I said, later on down the line, a few months later, I began a coaching relationship with her. Of course, using a counseling approach, and this is an ongoing relationship. I'm seeing this person once a month, and yeah, I find it really, really helpful. She gives me really good insights, really good resources, and I kick up the bum sometimes because I need it and I'm asking for it. So yeah, this experience of endings for me has been really eye-opening, and it taught me a lot about how I will be able to help in my role as a counselor a few years down the line. Yeah, so this has kind of been a bit about my experience of endings. I hope you found helpful whatever I shared here. Before I finish, one last thing I want to say, I mentioned to you that I'll be updating you on the progress of my training. So yeah, next month I am beginning the diploma course, and I'm very excited about that. So I'll be doing the counseling certificate, COSCA level 8 and the diploma at the same time. This is possible for me because of my background and my work experience and of my previous studies in psychology. And as I mentioned to you at the very beginning in one of the first videos, when you apply for a diploma in counseling, to become a counselor, an accredited counselor, they will assess your readiness from your application as well as from the interview. I had the chance to have this interview and make the application, be selected for the interview, and they reached the conclusion that I was ready to undertake this training, even if I didn't necessarily finish the level 8 counseling skills certificate. Yeah, I'm excited. I will be starting this diploma course end of September. Well, end of September 15th. It will be 1 weekend a month, 2 full days of training that will involve a lot of theory and a lot of practice skills, and yeah, it will be exciting. I'm going to tell about that when I'm going to reach that stage. So that will be the next video. Probably I'll be touching on that as well a bit, hopefully. And with regards to the certificate in counseling skills level 8 that I'm doing now, we now finished module 2 and we are now beginning module 3. We had a summer break. That will be at the end of this month. We'll start module 3, and module 3 consists of exploring the psychotherapeutic modalities that the counselor can use to help their client. And that will be the psychodynamic approach or model, the CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy, and the person-centered. So I think these are 3 main psychotherapeutic modalities that a counselor or a psychotherapist uses to support their clients. Of course, there is an entire host of therapeutic modalities that a counselor can use. We're exploring these 3 core ones that are kind of the meat of counseling and psychotherapy. And if for the module 1 and module 2, the student can pass themselves, given their acknowledgement of their development, personal and professional, in module 3, the trainer gets to decide whether you developed the skills that you're required to develop, and they will advance you further onto the next module. As you already know, if you've seen my previous videos, this COSCA Counseling Skills Certificate has 4 modules, so we are halfway, right? I've completed the half of the program. It's really exciting. I feel like I've learned a lot. My head has been really full of theory. I feel like I've learned a lot. I developed a lot as a person, as an individual, and my skills have developed really good. So I'm very excited about my further development in Module 3 and Module 4, as well as undertaking and starting the diploma course. So I'm looking forward to my experience and my learning about my strengths and my limitations, and how can I further grow as an individual and as a trainee counselor. With all this being said, thank you very much for being here. I hope that whatever I shared has been helpful and informative. If you have any questions, please just leave me a comment. And I hope to see you next time. Till then, take really good care of yourself and be kind, as I like saying, and I really believe in that kindness is the secret for yourself and for others. Take care. Bye for now.